Good morning and welcome to the November 2021 almost Thanksgiving open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda this morning?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 3 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a second report and order that would require covered text providers to support text messaging to 988 by routing certain text messages sent to 988 to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline by July 16, 2022. Second, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking proposing an enhanced competition incentive program, or ECIP, and other rule changes intended to promote competition, access to spectrum by small carriers and tribal nations, and expanded rural wireless coverage. Third, you will consider an order and declaratory ruling on CNACE's petition to access the U.S. market using a low Earth orbit satellite system to provide connectivity for Internet of Things devices, as well as enhancements to maritime domain awareness through monitoring of maritime communications. Please note item 3, updating FM radio directional antenna verification, as listed on the Commission's November 10th Sunshine Notice, has been adopted by the Commission and deleted from today's agenda. The first item on your agenda is entitled Enabling Text to 988 and will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Monteith, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning to you and your fellow commissioners. Always a pleasure. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a second report and order that, if adopted, would require covered text providers to support text messages to 988, the forthcoming 3-digit dialing code to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, easing access to life-saving mental health and crisis services. I would like to thank the entire Bureau team for their hard work, as well as our colleagues in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs, Public Safety and Homeland Security, and Wireless Telecommunications Bureaus, as well as the Offices of Economics and Analytics and General Counsel for their helpful input. I also would like to thank our federal partners at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs for their close coordination. Presenting the item today from the Wireline Competition Bureau's Competition Policy Division is Jamie McCoy. Jamie?
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. In 2020, 44,834 individuals died by suicide in the United States. And evidence suggests the toll of the global pandemic has increased the strain on many Americans' mental health and well-being. Suicide disproportionately impacts various at-risk populations, including youth, the Black community, the LGBTQ+ community, veterans, and the deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, and the people who have speech disabilities that impact communication. Americans sent an estimated 2.2 trillion text messages in 2020, and text messaging is a particularly popular mode of communication for communities that are at a higher risk of suicide and mental health crises. Reaching suicide prevention and mental health crisis intervention services should be easy, intuitive, and available to all. In July of 2020, the Commission adopted a report and order that designated 988 as the 3-digit code to reach the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline's current 10-digit number, 1-800-273-8255, or TALK. Covered providers are required to implement 988 by July 16, 2022. Several providers, including T-Mobile, Verizon Wireless, and AT&T Mobile Service, have recently made 988 available to their customers ahead of this deadline. This second report and order, if adopted, would expand the availability of critical mental health and crisis counseling resources by requiring covered text providers defined to include CMRS providers and providers of interconnected text messaging service to support text messaging to 988 by routing text messages sent to 988 to the Lifeline's current 10-digit number, 1-800-273-8255 or TALK. The second report and order, if adopted, would set the outer bound of text message formats that covered text providers may be required to transmit. It would also adopt a process whereby the Wireline Competition Bureau will require covered text providers to support transmitting messages to 988 in text messaging formats that the Lifeline is capable of receiving. The second report and order would also adopt a uniform nationwide implementation deadline of July 16, 2022 for all covered text providers to support text messaging to 988 across the country. This is the same deadline that applies for telephone calls to 988. Additionally, it will find that no significant software, equipment, or network upgrades are necessary to implement texting to 988. The Bureau recommends adoption of this second report and order and requests editorial privileges. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you. We will now hear comments from the bench. We'll begin with Commissioner Carr.
Thank you. Suicide is a national tragedy, and thankfully the conversations around mental and behavioral health, feelings of crisis are starting to change in this country. And there's really any step that we can take to break down barriers to receiving the care that everybody needs is so important. Probably one of the most important things we can do, even in these jobs here at the FCC. And the idea that crisis and feelings of isolation and loneliness only hit other people or them over there is part of the problem, because it hits all of us. It's our parents, it's our kids, it's ourselves. And so anything we can do to just take another step towards breaking down that barrier to getting help is something we should do. And I was proud of the action that we all took last year to go to a short code for calling that can help. And this action, I think, is another really important step forward. Creating a short code and moving forward with texting to 988, it's going to be just a little bit easier. Maybe there's one person, maybe there's more than one person who, it's easy to send that text and they may hesitate to make the call. So I'm glad that we're, moving forward and putting more options on the table and continuing to make it easier for people to get care. So thanks so much to the chair, Rosenworcel, for moving this item forward, bringing it forward for a vote. It has my support. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we'll hear from Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. For many of the populations most at risk for suicide, including, as we heard, young people, minority communities, veterans, people with disabilities, texting is that critical way to communicate. And so I'm pleased to approve today's decision, because text to 988 will save lives in these vulnerable, underserved communities and many others by taking advantage of this vital communications channel. The actions we take today are urgent. Centers for Disease Control data shows that serious psychological distress, major depression, suicidal thoughts, and attempts among adolescents and young adults have increased significantly in recent years. The suicide death rate among people 10 to 24 years old for the years 2016 to 2018 was a staggering 47.1% higher than 2007-2009. Death by suicide among veterans has also rapidly increased. LGBTQ+ youth are nearly 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth. And additionally, during the COVID-19 lockdown, suicide rates among African Americans doubled. Studies also found an increased risk of suicide among deaf and hard of hearing people when compared to those without hearing loss. And so the free and confidential emotional support provided by the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline can make all the difference for people in distress. The 3-digit texting to 988 will remove barriers to accessing help. Nearly 95% of teens have access to a smartphone. Research indicates young people actually prefer communicating by text, are more likely to otherwise forego psychological support when talking in person or over the phone. And so the ability to text to the Lifeline presents a significant benefit as well to disabled communities who may have difficulties calling, including deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, and people who have speech disabilities. And again, to close here, access to the Lifeline can't wait. With substantial support among commenters, today's decision will require the covered providers to implement texting to 988 by that same date, July 16th, 2022. That deadline set for the 3-digit dialing to the Lifeline. And so this uniform deadline is something that I appreciate and will help prevent confusion, facilitate unified outreach campaigns, all the things that we also think about in reaching impact. And so thank you so much to the hard work by the team. And I deeply appreciate and I'm proud of this matter as well. Thank you. This is life-saving work, truly.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks. Now we will hear from Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I'm happy to support this item. Building on our previous actions designating 988 as the 3-digit dialing code for calls to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, expanding that service to text messages will ensure that this important resource is accessible to the deaf, the hard of hearing, and those with difficulty speaking. I also hope that it will increase uptake of this service by those who would simply prefer to communicate by text, who are more comfortable doing so, perhaps due to embarrassment, fears for their safety, or simply greater affinity for the medium. So I'd like to thank the staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau for their hard work.
Thank you, commissioners. You know, suicide is all too common in this country, particularly among young people and in at-risk communities. I mean, over the last 2 decades, the rate of suicide for young girls has tripled, and we've seen similar increases in suicide from Black youth, and we know that LGBTQ youth are more than almost 5 times more likely to attempt suicide as their heterosexual peers. Plus, young people who are deaf or hard of hearing are far more likely than their hearing peers to contemplate ending their own lives. And these truths are undeniably painful because these young people deserve a future. They deserve support. And that support should be simple to access. Today, we're going to help make that possible. We were already on course, thanks to the work of my predecessor, to make the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline an easy to remember 3-digit code, 988, available nationwide on July 16th, 2022. But to date, the plan had been to make this code available only for traditional voice calls. We changed that here and now. We require carriers to route 988 texts to the Lifeline too, and we do this because we know that for millions of us, but especially young people and those with disabilities, they're more likely to text than they are to call when they are in crisis. And the bottom line is it shouldn't matter if you make a voice call or send a text message, because we should connect people in crisis to the resources they need, no matter how they communicate. It's important to note the critical role of the Department of Health and Human Services, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and the Department of Veterans Affairs in this effort. They're absolutely vital. They oversee the Lifeline and the Veterans Crisis Line, both of which are available 24 hours a day, every day of the year. So until July 16th, 2022, please call the Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 if you need immediate help. And service members, veterans, and their families may reach the Veterans Crisis Line by calling 1-800-273-8255 and pressing 1, or by texting 838-255. I'm really grateful to these agencies for their feedback and support, and want them to know that we're going to continue to work with our federal partners to make the transition to 988 a success. I also want to express my gratitude to the staff for their work on this issue, including Pam Arlick, Allison Baker, Emily Kaditz, Elizabeth Kuttner, Jesse Goodwin, Heather Hendrickson, Dan Kahn, Melissa Kirkle, Jamie McCoy, Chris Monteith, Zach Ross, and Michelle Slater of the Wireline Competition Bureau. Robert Aldrich, Diane Burstein, Elliot Greenwald, Mika Savier, Michael Scott, Susie Rosen Singleton, Richard Smith, Christy Thornton, and Bill Wallace of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Brenda Boykin, Ken Kralberg, John Evanoff, David Firth, Rasul Savavian, and Rachel Ware of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Garnet Hanley, George Luris, Susanna Larson, Catherine Schroeder, Ty Tran, and Matthew Warner of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Patrick Brogan, Stacy Jordan, Eugene Kiselev, Eric Ralph, and Emily Talaga of the Office of Economics and Analytics. And Terry Kavanaugh, Doug Klein, and Rick Mallon, Linda Oliver, Paula Silberthau, and Anjali Singh of the Office of General Counsel. And with that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
And the chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, item 2 on your agenda is entitled Enhanced Competition Incentive Program for Wireless Radio Services and will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Joel Taubenblatt, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Taubenblatt, please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. Today, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration an item that would propose rules for a new enhanced competition incentive program that would promote a diversity of spectrum uses and increase rural wireless coverage. I would like to thank the WTB team for their hard work on this item. Catherine Patsis-Nevitt, an attorney in the Mobility Division of the Wireless Bureau, will present this item. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairwoman Rosenworcel and Commissioners. The further notice of proposed rulemaking presented for your consideration today would propose rules for an enhanced competition incentive program for qualifying transactions involving the partition, disaggregation, or leasing of spectrum licenses. The program is intended to build upon Congress's goals in the Mobile Now Act and to further certain longstanding Commission goals, including incentivizing licensees to make spectrum available to small carriers and tribal nations, and promoting the availability of advanced telecommunications services, including 5G, in underserved rural areas. To qualify for benefits under the proposed program, the transaction must designate a minimum of 50% of the licensed spectrum from a license to an assignee through either a small carrier or tribal transaction or through rural-focused transactions. Qualifying small carrier or tribal transactions must designate a minimum amount of at least 25% of the licensed market area to a covered small carrier or to a federally recognized tribe. Qualifying rural-focused transactions must include a minimum amount of qualifying geography to cover at least 300 contiguous square miles of rural area, but would permit participation by an expanded group of stakeholders. For example, small or large carriers, non-common carriers, critical infrastructure, and other private business users. The further notice seeks comment on appropriate qualifying geography for transactions that involve tribal lands. The proposed ESIP program would offer 3 primary benefits. First, a 5-year extension of the license terms for all parties to a qualifying transaction. Second, a 1-year extension of interim and final construction deadlines for all parties to a qualifying transaction in a partition or disaggregation and to the lessor in a qualifying lease. Third, substitution of coverage of the ESIP qualifying geography in lieu of current construction requirements for rural-focused transactions involving partition or disaggregation. The further notice proposes the following waste, fraud, and abuse protections as part of the program. First, automatic license termination, where an assignee in a qualifying transaction fails to meet the program requirements and/or construction requirements, and a bar of any licensee that fails to meet program requirements from future participation in the program. Second, a post-assignment holding period of 5 years commencing upon grant of the application, as well as a minimum lease term of 5 years. Third, a 3-year ongoing operational and service requirement for the qualifying geography, the 300 square mile contiguous area, included in a rural-focused transaction. Independent of the Enhanced Competition Incentive Program, the further notice would seek comment on alternatives to population-based construction metrics for all wireless radio service flexible use licensees that have business models less suited to meeting the typically required population coverage. Finally, The further notice would seek comment on whether and how to factor the use of Open RAN technologies into the ESIP and on incentives to promote greater spectrum sharing, including sharing by licensees with opportunistic users on a secondary basis. The Wireless Telecommunications Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear comments from the bench, and we will start again with Commissioner Carr.
Well, thanks to the team so much for your work in putting this together. We're making some more progress on the good ideas put forward in the Mobile Now Act, and I'm glad to see it. I know there was a lot of hard work that went into this, some interesting new ideas, and I'm happy that we're moving forward and exploring them. So thanks to you all at the Bureau for putting this forward. Thanks.
Commissioner Starks.
Yes, the Duck Valley Indian Reservation is home to the Shoshone-Paiute tribal nation. It's in an isolated portion of northern Nevada, about 90 miles from the nearest interstate. The reservation is served by a single cell tower, and residents have described needing to drive out of town simply to update their phones. And they aren't, of course, the only tribal community with a lack of quality wireless service. A 2019 survey by the American Indian Policy Institute found that even though most tribal respondents relied on their smartphones to access the internet, more than a third had issues connecting. And according to a recent study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, mobile wireless download speeds are 45% slower in tribal areas nationwide than in non-tribal areas. And so this item proposes an enhanced competition incentive program that would encourage wireless licensees to engage in those secondary market transactions with tribes and small rural carriers to expand, improve wireless service in their communities. It's really past time for this type of action. More than 10 years ago, the commission, of course, released an NPRM acknowledging the lack of high quality wireless service on tribal lands and the complaints really from tribal communities about underutilized spectrum in their areas. That NPRM proposed measures to encourage the secondary market transactions between wireless licensees and tribes, but the commission never finalized any rules. 3 years ago, the GAO published a report recounting complaints from tribal entities about their unsuccessful attempts to enter again these secondary market transactions with wireless licensees. Those tribes and industry associations told GAO that these transactions often failed because simply the potential financial benefits were outweighed by the potential costs. Here's another real example. Earlier this year, I met with the Red Cliff Tribal Nation located in northern Wisconsin on the shores of Lake Superior. The Red Cliff tribe has had difficulties in obtaining wireless service, even though it sits within the service area of a licensee on the other side of the lake. The licensee has focused its build out on more populated and prosperous areas and asserts that it would be too costly to extend service to the Red Cliff community. Here's the thing. The Red Cliff tribe says that it has the resources and expertise to build out service on its own. It only needs the spectrum. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from stakeholders about whether the incentives we propose in this item could address situations like this so that we can expand and improve service to communities like the Red Cliff tribe. Unfortunately, as we heard, these same incentives could attract bad actors seeking to exploit the program through abuses. And so throughout my career at the commission and, of course, previously at the Department of Justice, I have focused on preventing waste, fraud, and abuse. And so I'm pleased that the item does seek comment on how we can prevent and punish misconduct. And I'll close here, but a program's success isn't measured solely by how it avoids abuse. Far too often, federal agencies adopt policies without making any subsequent effort to review and understand whether those policies are achieving their objectives. So I appreciated that my colleagues agreed with my suggestion to seek comment on whether we should do a public report on ESIP's effectiveness 5 years after the program begins. If ultimately adopted, the ESIP will be a new approach towards encouraging the expansion of high-quality wireless service to all communities. And so this follow-up report, I think, is a great way to allow the commission and the public to assess and understand the program's progress towards our goals. Thank you, of course, to the team for their hard work on this.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks, and thank you for your contribution to this rulemaking. Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I'm happy to support today's further notice, which builds on the record initiated to examine the availability of wireless service and spectrum access in rural areas and on tribal lands. The further notice takes the next step to fulfill the Commission's duties under the Mobile Now Act, including the creation of new opportunities for small carriers to expand 5G wireless deployment in rural and underserved areas. I support today's item and thank the staff of the Wireless Bureau for their hard work.
Thank you, commissioners. You know, it was a few years back that Senator Klobuchar and Senator Fisher introduced bipartisan legislation to increase opportunities for spectrum access and extend the reach of wireless broadband in rural communities. They proposed to do this by providing incentives for large wireless carriers to make their unused spectrum available to smaller rural carriers who were willing and ready to put it to use to bring new wireless service to some of the nation's hardest to reach areas. This was a good idea, and it was incorporated into the Mobile Now Act. Today, we're going to work to put this idea into practice, and we're doing that by proposing a new program to help grow wireless competition and create new opportunities for smaller carriers and tribal nations to succeed in their wireless ambitions. We're calling it the Enhanced Competition Incentive Program, or ECIP, and here's how it works. We know today that some wireless providers have access to airwaves that others might be better positioned to deploy. But our rules don't always make it easy to get spectrum resources to those who want to build in the places that need it most. And this new program will help fix that by building better incentives. Specifically, an existing wireless provider that uses its license to create new spectrum opportunities for smaller carriers, tribal nations, or others serving rural areas will see gain and not just loss for doing so, because we'll reward them with longer license terms, more flexible construction requirements, and some more options for complying with our rules. But that's not all. We also seek comment on related policies that would facilitate a range of new opportunities in these areas for everything from the Internet of Things to precision agriculture. My thanks to the dedicated staff that worked on this effort to promote competition and deployment. That includes Lloyd Coward, Peter Doronko, Diane Dupert, Garnet Hanley, Susanna Larson, Georgios Liros, Paul Malmud, John Markman, Charles Mathias, Justin McCune, Susan Mort, Roger Noel, Catherine Nevitz, Jessica Quinley, Linda Ray, Blaise Cinto, Nadia Sotos Wallace, and Dorothy Stiffelmeyer, Cecilia Stallhoff, Joel Tavenblatt, and Jeffrey Tigner from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, David Horowitz, Doug Klein, and Bill Richardson from the Office of General Counsel, Patrick Brogan, Patrick DeGraba, Judith Dempsey, Rachel Kazan, Kate Martres, Mark Montano, Michelle Schaefer, John Stockdale, Emily Talaga, and Alex Yankovic from the Office of Economics and Analytics, Shannon Lipp, Neil McNeil, and Josh Zeldis from the Enforcement Bureau, Carolyn Conyers, Matthew Dupain, Barbara Esbin, Derek Goetson, and Sayuri Jayakapis from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, as well as Shauna Wilkerson from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. And with that, we're going to proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Chair votes aye. This item is adopted with editorial privileges just as requested. Now, Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, item 3 on your agenda will be presented by the International Bureau and is entitled CNAIS Low Earth Orbit Satellites Market Access. Tom Sullivan, Chief of the Bureau, will introduce the item.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Sullivan, please proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, and apologies for my video not working, but we're going to make the best. It's probably better for you as well. I'm pleased to be here this morning to present the International Bureau's latest efforts to allow regulatory approval for innovative space-based services. Today, we recommend that the Commission adopt an order and declaratory ruling that would allow CNAIS, an Internet of Things satellite company, to provide service in the United States under certain conditions. I'd like to thank the team in the International Bureau for their work on this order, as well as my colleagues in the Office of Economics and Analytics, Office of Engineering and Technology, Office of General Counsel, and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. for their review and assistance with the item. Jamie Ann Fuller, an attorney advisor in the Satellite Division's Policy Branch, will present the item this morning.
Madam Chairwoman, Commissioners, good morning. Before you for consideration is a draft order and declaratory ruling that grants Kinesis petition to access the U.S. market using a constellation of non-geostationary orbit satellites that will provide connectivity for Internet of Things devices in the maritime, agriculture, outdoor sports, security, and scientific sectors in the United States and worldwide. The Kinesis system will also enhance maritime domain awareness through monitoring of maritime communications. Additionally, the Kinesis satellite system will build upon and be compatible with the Argos data collection system, a worldwide network of data collection satellites managed by NASA, NOAA, and France's space agency Kinesis. The Argos system is used for a number of applications, such as monitoring the oceans, tracking the movements of wildlife, relaying information by humanitarian agencies from remote areas, monitoring water resources, and tracking the locations of ships. The draft order grants Kinesis' request to access the U.S. market using a constellation of up to 25 satellites that will be authorized by France, using frequencies of the non-voice, non-geostationary mobile satellite service and Earth exploration satellite service. Specifically, Kinesis would communicate with Earth stations in the United States using the 399.9 to 400.05 megahertz and 401 to 403 megahertz bands in the Earth to space direction, as well as the 400.15 to 401 megahertz band in the space to Earth direction. 5 of Kinesis satellites will also actively monitor signals in the 156.7625 to 162.0375 megahertz band that are transmitted by stations in the maritime service. The draft order also recommends granting Kinesis' request for waivers of certain Commission rules, including the U.S. Table of Frequency Allocations and rules for governing the information submitted in the Schedule S software. The draft order specifies conditions to protect or accommodate other operations in these frequency bands, including federal operations and other systems licensed as part of the same processing round as Kinesis. The International Bureau recommends adoption of this order and declaratory ruling and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll now hear any comments from the bench. Commissioner Carr.
Well, thank you to the team for your work on this item, and kudos to the petitioner for getting this far in the process. Our satellite rules are not always the easiest to navigate. There's some interesting quirks in that system, but maybe that's a conversation for another day. But this item has my support, and thanks again to the team for your work on the item.
Commissioner Starks.
Yes, agree with that, and thank you for the hard work for the team on this item.
Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I support today's item, and I also thank the IB staff for the thorough work on it.
Well, thank you, Commissioners. Moving right along, I am proud of the work that we've done on this petition today, and I want to thank the staff who worked on it, including Jamie Ann Fuller, Jennifer Gillison, Samuel Carty, Carl Kensinger, Catherine Medley, Tom Sullivan, Troy Tanner, and Marissa Velez from the International Bureau, David Konskal and Bill Richardson from the Office of General Counsel, Virginia Metallo and Marilyn Simon from the Office of Economics and Analytics, Michael Ha, Nicholas Oros, Jameson Prine, Ron Rapazzi, and Tom Struble from the Office of Engineering and Technology, and Lloyd Coward, Linda Chang, Tom Dugrange, Ghassan Kalek, Roger Noel, Tim McGuire, Matt Pearl, Jessica Quinley, Sean Spivey, Joel Tavenbout, and Jeff Tobias from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. And with that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
And the chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges. Now that we're moving with record speed, let me ask my colleagues if any one of them wants to make an announcement at this time. Commissioner Carr? We have silenced him, it appears. Okay. Commissioner Starks?
Yes, very briefly, it is that season. Want to thank the interns in my office who will leave before the December open meeting. Thank you to each of them for their hard work, for dedication. Like many folks through the pandemic, I have a special place in my heart for students. It's such a both a difficult time, but also a very time for great opportunities, and they have just done such great work for helping me, helping my team. The James Elistondo, Brittany Gambrell, and Haley Laws, all the best to each of you, and we'll of course look forward to great things from you. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Symington.
No announcements at this time. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, commissioners. Before we adjourn, I want to make one brief announcement. Longtime Senior Counsel Amy Nathan is retiring this week. Over the past 2+ decades, she's worked closely with the FCC, and in fact, she's worked closely with 9 chairmen and their staffs, both Democrats and Republicans, as well as many of the other commissioners. Most recently, she's served as senior counsel in the Office of Economics and Analytics, but she's worked in virtually every bureau in the commission, and she's represented the agency with other branches of the government, including OMB, the State Department, the FTC, Commerce, the Department of Education, and the White House. And she says that it is amazing to see how much the agency has accomplished in the year she's been here to truly improve the lives of ordinary citizens. Now, she came to the FCC and the Media Bureau back when Bill Kennard was chairman, and she became acting associate bureau chief in the then Common Carrier Bureau, where she actually helped to oversee the implementation of the E-rate program. Then she went on to the agency's think tank, the Office of Plans and Policy, where she worked on many issues, including intellectual property, privacy, bridging the digital divide, the transition from analog to digital television, mobile telephony issues, including encryption, and she's worked on the Sunshine Act, inmate calling services, broadband access more generally, just so much more. Now, before COVID sent us home to work, she mentored many of the agency's interns. She took them and others to staff to Hill hearings, museums, art galleries, and really embraced taking them to opportunities around Washington. She's especially proud of the fact that when the agency was open, she knew the names and personal stories of every security guard. She's going to be missed by so many, and we wish her only good things in retirement. And with that, Madam Secretary, please announce the next meeting of the Federal Communications Commission.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Tuesday, December 14th, 2021.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And until then, we stand adjourned.